Amelia had always admired Maxwell Anderson from a distance, working as a maid in his grand estate. But when he invited her on a business trip to New York, everything changed. What began as a professional opportunity soon turned into a life-altering experience. Maxwell revealed his long-hidden feelings for her, and amidst the high-stakes business meetings and glamorous galas, Amelia found herself on a journey that blurred the lines between work and love. As the trip unfolded, emotions ran high, and Amelia was faced with a new reality, one where the man she admired felt the same way about her. If you are not subscribed, I recommend you subscribe and activate the bell so you don't miss any videos. Before we dive into this story, please let me know in the comments where you're watching from. The rhythm of the vacuum cleaner thrummed softly, a constant companion to Amelia Carter's wandering thoughts as she moved across the grand living room of the Anderson estate. The vastness of the space was overwhelming, an expanse of luxury and wealth that seemed to swallow her whole. The marble floors, the towering ceilings, and the crystal chandeliers above sparkled like distant stars, so far beyond her reach. Yet she remained grounded, her feet firmly planted on the plush, expensive carpet, her hands expertly guiding the vacuum as she methodically cleaned the room she had come to know so well. As Amelia worked, her gaze drifted to the mantelpiece, where a collection of framed photographs captured the life of her employer, Maxwell Anderson. His wide, charming smile leaped out from every image, his eyes, bright and full of life, crinkling at the corners as he attended high-profile charity events, accepted prestigious business awards, and stood among some of the most powerful people in the city. Maxwell Anderson was more than just a millionaire. He was a man whose charisma drew people in, a force of nature in every room he entered. And every time Amelia looked at those photos, a pang of longing stirred in her chest, one she could barely suppress. For 3 years, she had worked as a housekeeper in the Anderson mansion, maintaining its splendor with a quiet efficiency that belied the turmoil brewing inside her. At just 28 years old, Amelia had made a life out of attending to the needs of others, her days filled with dusting, polishing, and ensuring the estate gleamed with perfection. And yet, with every stroke of the duster, every sweep of the broom, her thoughts lingered on the man she admired from afar. It wasn't the vast wealth that captivated her, it was Maxwell Anderson himself. It was the small moments that had stolen her heart over time. The way he took a genuine interest in the lives of his staff, asking about their families with an attentiveness that felt rare in someone of his stature. The way he offered a kind word when he saw she was having a long day, his voice carrying warmth that melted the icy barrier she tried to keep between them. And then there was his laugh, deep, rich, and filled with life. Whenever she overheard it echoing through the mansion, her chest would tighten with an ache she could barely understand. It was as if his joy touched something in her that had long been dormant, stirring emotions she dared not admit, even to herself. Amelia had kept her admiration hidden, locked tightly inside where no one could see it. After all, she was just the help. A maid, a woman who cleaned his floors and dusted his bookshelves. There was no place in Maxwell Anderson's world for someone like her, someone without wealth, without influence. He belonged to a different universe, one filled with glamour and privilege, a world where men like him never even glanced at women like her. She chastised herself for the foolish fantasies that sometimes crept into her mind. It was ridiculous to even imagine. Maxwell was newly divorced, a man whose life revolved around his business empire and philanthropic endeavors. There was no room in his heart for a housekeeper. If you're still tuned into this video and find the story inspiring, drop a 1 in the comments to let me know you're still with me. But no matter how many times she reminded herself of this, her feelings persisted. Every stolen glance at him was like a small, secret indulgence. She wondered if he ever noticed her, really noticed her, beyond the formalities of employer and employee. Did he ever see the way her cheeks flushed when he walked into the room? Did he ever sense the way her pulse quickened whenever their paths crossed in the vast corridors of the estate? Of course not, she told herself. It was impossible. She was invisible to him, just a shadow in the background of his glittering life. As she dusted the bookshelves in his study, lost in her thoughts, the door swung open suddenly, jolting her back to the present. Her heart leaped into her throat as Maxwell strode in, his tall frame filling the room with an effortless grace that made her breath catch. His designer suit, usually pristine, was slightly rumpled, and his copper hair tousled in a way that made him look all the more endearing. He had the air of a man who had just come from a long day, yet his energy remained undeniable, commanding, magnetic. "Oh, Amelia," he said, his voice like a gentle caress against her senses, "I didn't mean to interrupt you." The sound of his voice sent a wave of warmth through her body, and for a moment she couldn't find her voice. When she finally spoke, her words were barely above a whisper, her usual composure slipping. "It's no trouble at all, Mr. Anderson," she managed, desperately hoping he wouldn't notice the flush creeping up her cheeks. "I'm nearly finished here." Maxwell waved a hand, dismissing her need for formality, his eyes soft with an apology that seemed far too sincere for someone of his status. "Please take your time. Don't rush on my account." Amelia's heart pounded in her chest. She felt the weight of the silence between them, every second stretching out as if the air had thickened with unspoken tension. She tried to focus on her work, but her mind was racing. Why had he come in? What did he want? Maxwell moved toward his desk, rifling through a few papers, his brow furrowed in thought. But then, without turning to face her, he spoke again. His voice, though calm, held a strange edge to it, something she couldn't quite place. "Amelia, I'm glad I caught you. There's something I've been meaning to ask you, something a bit unusual." Her pulse quickened, and she felt a knot of anxiety twist in her stomach. His words, so casual, yet so laden with mystery, left her mind spinning. What could he possibly want from her? What could he have to ask that was so unusual? Amelia swallowed hard, her throat suddenly dry, and forced herself to speak, though her voice trembled with uncertainty. "So," she asked, her heart hammering in her chest. Maxwell finally turned to face her, and in that moment, as his eyes met hers, something shifted in the air between them. The weight of all her unspoken feelings crashed over her like a tidal wave, and for the first time, she allowed herself to hope. Could it be? Could he, against all logic, all reason, possibly feel something for her too? She tried to tamp down the rising tide of emotion, but it was impossible. In that brief moment, as he stood before her with an expression she had never seen before, it felt like the world had tilted on its axis, and nothing would ever be the same again. Maxwell turned to face her, and in his deep, piercing gaze, Amelia could see something flickering beneath his usual confidence. His expression was a careful blend of determination, but there was an undercurrent of vulnerability that startled her. Was it nervousness? It was so uncharacteristic of the self-assured millionaire that she found herself frozen, her heart pounding wildly in her chest. "I have an important business trip next week," he began, his voice quieter than usual, almost hesitant. "It's a series of high-stakes meetings in New York, ones that could be game-changing for the company. But it's also," he paused, his eyes drifting away as if he were searching for the right words, "it's also the charity gala my ex-wife and I used to host together." A strange pang shot through Amelia's chest at the mention of his ex-wife, but she kept her face composed. She nodded, recalling the extravagant event she had quietly prepared for in past years, where glamorous guests filled the Anderson home with laughter and excitement. She remembered how she had watched from the sidelines, always admiring Maxwell's charm from afar, even as her heart silently ached with her private longing. Maxwell continued, his tone shifting, drawing her in closer. "The thing is, Amelia, I need someone I can trust, someone who can handle not only the business side of things, but also the social aspects of this trip. Someone discreet, organized, and capable." He stopped, locking eyes with her. And for a moment, the room seemed to shrink, the space between them charged with an energy she didn't fully understand. "I was hoping you might consider coming with me as my assistant." Amelia felt the world tilt beneath her. Her breath caught in her throat, and before she could stop it, the vacuum slipped from her hand, crashing loudly to the floor. Her cheeks flamed as she scrambled to pick it up, mortified by her clumsiness. I don't know what to say, Mr. Anderson," she stammered, her voice trembling. "I'm not qualified. I've never done anything like that before." "Nonsense," Maxwell interrupted, his voice warm and reassuring. He stepped closer, his presence overwhelming in the small space, yet oddly comforting. "You've practically run this household for years, Amelia. Your attention to detail is unmatched, and your ability to anticipate needs. It's remarkable. I've watched the way you carry yourself, the way you interact with people. You have a natural grace, one that would be invaluable for an event like this." Her heart raced faster now, her mind spinning with a whirlwind of thoughts. Could she do this? Could she leave behind the safety of her routine and immerse herself in Maxwell's world, a world filled with powerful people, glittering events, and him? Working so closely with him, how would she control her emotions? How would she keep her heart from betraying her? The thought both thrilled and terrified her in equal measure. Maxwell seemed to sense her hesitation. He smiled a small, almost tender expression that sent a jolt of warmth straight to her core. "I know it's a lot to ask," he said, his voice softer now, "and it would be a big change from your usual duties, but I trust you, Amelia. And the pay would be more than appropriate for the role, of course. All expenses covered. If you need time to think it over, I understand." Amelia took a deep breath, trying to steady herself. This was an opportunity she could never have imagined in her wildest dreams, and yet here it was, being handed to her by the very man who unknowingly held her heart. How could she say no? This wasn't just about the job, this was a chance to prove herself, to step into a different world. And perhaps, just perhaps, it was an opportunity to be seen by Maxwell in a way she had only dared to dream of. "Mr. Anderson," she began, her voice gaining strength as she met his gaze with newfound resolve, "I would be honored to assist you on this trip." Maxwell's face broke into a wide grin, his relief palpable. It was as if a weight had been lifted from his shoulders, and the warmth of his smile made her heart flutter in ways she couldn't control. "That's fantastic. I can't tell you how much this means to me, Amelia. Truly. We'll go over all the details tomorrow if that works for you." She nodded, still feeling dazed by how quickly her life seemed to be changing. As Maxwell left the room, Amelia's eyes wandered to his desk, where a small, nearly hidden photograph caught her attention. It was from last year's company picnic, a candid shot of Maxwell laughing with the staff, his carefree smile lighting up the frame. And there, barely noticeable in the background, was Amelia. She stood just out of focus, gazing at him with an expression she had tried so hard to hide, a look of pure admiration, tinged with the affection she had kept secret for so long. Her cheeks burned with embarrassment. Had he noticed? Had he seen how she looked at him all this time? The thought sent a rush of panic through her, but before it could consume her, another realization settled in a quiet, hopeful whisper in the back of her mind. Maybe, just maybe, he had seen. Maybe this trip wasn't just about business. Maybe there was something more. Something that neither of them had dared to acknowledge until now. With trembling hands, Amelia resumed her cleaning, but her mind was elsewhere, spinning with the possibilities that lay ahead. 1 week in New York with Maxwell Anderson. 1 week to prove her worth, to navigate his world of high society and elite business. And perhaps 1 week to discover if the connection she felt between them was real, if it could ever be more than just a dream. As the sun dipped below the horizon, casting the study in a warm, golden glow, Amelia allowed herself a rare smile. Whatever awaited her in New York, she would face it head-on. And whether it was destiny or simply a wild adventure, she was ready to embrace it. The sleek private jet soared through the sky, cutting effortlessly through the clouds. Inside, the world felt impossibly luxurious, with leather seats, polished wood, and soft lighting creating an atmosphere of elegance that was entirely foreign to Amelia. She sat across from Maxwell, her hands folded neatly in her lap, trying to maintain a composed exterior despite the wild storm of emotions swirling inside her. The butterflies in her stomach were relentless, but she couldn't help but steal glances at him, wondering what the future held. If you're still tuned into this video and find the story inspiring, drop a 2 in the comments to let me know you're still with me. How are you finding the flight? Amelia Max's voice pulled her from the storm of thoughts swirling in her head. His warm brown eyes locked with hers, and for a moment, the hum of the plane's engines faded, leaving only the pulse of her heartbeat in her ears. "It's incredible, Mr. Anders," she caught herself flustered, remembering what he had asked just moments ago. Max, thank you again for this opportunity." Max waved off her thanks, flashing that disarming smile she had grown so accustomed to. "No need to thank me. You've earned this. And really call me Max. We'll be working closely together this week. Mr. Anderson feels far too formal." She nodded, though the casual use of his first name felt oddly intimate, an intimacy that both excited and terrified her. "Of course, Max." As the plane began its descent into New York, the skyline of the city unfolded before her eyes, a vast expanse of glittering lights that seemed to stretch on forever. The weight of the past few days settled in, and her mind raced back to everything that had led up to this moment. She had scrambled to find a few professional outfits, stretching her budget far beyond what she was comfortable with. Olivia, her best friend, had been cautiously optimistic. "Just be careful," Ames Olivia had warned. "You've had a crush on this guy for years, but don't let that cloud your judgment. He's still your boss." Amelia had brushed off Olivia's concerns with a confident smile, assuring her that she could remain professional. But now, sitting across from Max and watching the way his hands moved deftly across his laptop, her stomach tightened. What if she had been overconfident? What if working so closely with him blurred the lines more than she could handle? Max interrupted her spiraling thoughts with a chuckle, noticing her wide-eyed expression as they descended closer to the city. First time in the Big Apple. Amelia nodded, her eyes still glued to the windows. It's incredible. Max's grin widened. Just wait until you see it up close, he leaned back, casually adding, we'll be staying at the plaza. I considered getting you a room at a different hotel nearby, but I figured it would be more convenient for us to be in the same place. I hope that's all right. Her heart skipped a beat, caught off guard by how close they would be throughout the trip. Of course, she replied, her voice steady, though inside she was anything but calm. That makes perfect sense. As they disembarked and entered the private terminal, everything felt surreal to Amelia. The luxurious surroundings, the sleek black car waiting for them, the driver holding a sign with Anderson printed in bold letters. It was all a stark contrast to the quiet simplicity of her everyday life. The ride into Manhattan was a blur of sights and sounds, her senses on overdrive as she tried to absorb the towering buildings, the endless sea of people, the pulse of the city that seemed to thrum with life. Max pointed out landmarks along the way, his excitement contagious. And there it is, he said as they pulled up to the plaza, his voice filled with pride. Home for the next week. Amelia stepped out of the car, craning her neck to take in the grandeur of the hotel, its iconic entrance bustling with well-dressed guests. Suddenly, she felt out of place. Her simple blouse and skirt were no match for the elegance that surrounded her. But she had no time to dwell on her discomfort, as Max was already leading the way inside, his energy propelling her forward. Everything felt different. He felt different. As they entered the hotel, a quiet moment passed between them, a charged silence that hinted at something more than just business. Max, for all his success, wasn't like other men in his position. He cared, not just about his company, but about people. And that genuine kindness was the very thing that made her heart ache. The car ride to their next destination interrupted the moment, but it left Amelia feeling unsettled. Was it just her imagination? Or had something truly shifted between them? She had always known her place as housekeeper, his employee, but now, the lines felt blurred, the boundaries less defined. The rest of the day passed in a whirlwind of meetings, site tours, and business engagements. Amelia threw herself into the work, absorbing every detail, every nuance of this new world she had been thrust into. It was exhilarating but exhausting, and by the time evening fell, she felt as though her mind was racing to keep up with the demands of the day. Later that evening, they found themselves at a rooftop bar, the city's skyline stretching out beneath them like a shimmering sea of light. Max handed her a glass of champagne, his smile soft and sincere. "To new beginnings," he said, his voice low, his eyes never leaving hers. Amelia clinked her glass against his, her hand trembling ever so slightly. As she took a sip, the effervescence of the champagne seemed to mirror the bubbles rising in her chest, a mix of excitement and something else she wasn't ready to name. The city lights twinkled below, casting a magical glow over everything, and in that moment, standing side by side with Max, something shifted. The air between them felt different. The boundaries that had once kept their worlds apart were dissolving, leaving a space filled with possibility, with tension. She could feel it, the way his gaze lingered on her a little too long, the way his words seemed to carry a deeper meaning. Amelia's mind swirled with questions, with the promise of what might be. Could she let herself hope for something more? Could this trip be the beginning of a new chapter, one where she was no longer just his housekeeper, but someone who truly mattered to him? As the night stretched on and the city sparkled beneath them, Amelia allowed herself, for the first time, to imagine a future that seemed impossible just days ago. The lines between them were blurring, and in the quiet space that remained, something beautiful, something terrifying was beginning to take shape. With a deep breath, Amelia looked out over the city, her heart both heavy and light with anticipation. Whatever was happening between her and Max was undeniable, and as much as she feared the unknown, she couldn't help but wonder what this new beginning might bring. "Max," Amelia began, her voice barely above a whisper, carrying the weight of her uncertainty, "I'm honored by your faith in me, but this is also sudden. I'm not sure I'm ready for such a massive change." She could feel the vulnerability seep into her words, a hesitation born from years of doubting her potential. Max turned toward her, his expression serious yet full of empathy. The usual lightheartedness in his demeanor was replaced with a deep intensity that caught her off guard. "I understand," he said softly, his voice steady but filled with conviction. "It's a lot to take in. But Amelia, I've seen what you're capable of. I've watched you navigate challenges with grace, manage complex situations, and consistently go above and beyond without even realizing it. The only thing holding you back is your self-doubt." His words struck her like lightning, cutting straight to the heart of the fears she had buried for so long. How many times had she silenced her dreams with the same phrase, "that could never be me"? How often had she dismissed her aspirations because she believed she wasn't enough, that people like Max lived in a world beyond her reach? "What if I fail?" she whispered, voicing her deepest fear, the one that had kept her from reaching higher all her life. Her hands clenched together, but before she could pull away, Max reached out, gently taking her hand in his. The warmth of his touch sent a surge of electricity through her, grounding her yet making her heart race at the same time. Max held her gaze, his voice quiet but unwavering. "Then you'll learn, and you'll try again. Success isn't about getting everything right the first time, Amelia. It's about persistence, about pushing forward even when it feels impossible. That's how real growth happens, through perseverance, not perfection." His words wrapped around her like a lifeline, offering her a glimpse of something she had never allowed herself to believe in her strength. As they stood there, hands linked, the city of New York sprawling beneath them in a sea of endless possibility, Amelia felt as though she was standing on the edge of a precipice. It wasn't just a professional leap she was contemplating, it was the leap into a life she had only dreamed of, filled with challenges she couldn't yet see, but also filled with a newfound sense of hope. Looking up into Max's eyes, she saw more than just a business mentor or employer. She saw faith in her potential, in her ability to step into the unknown and emerge stronger. The warmth in his eyes and the gentle, steady pressure of his hand in hers sent her heart racing for reasons beyond her understanding. This trip turned out to be more than just a career move. It was the beginning of something unspoken, something fragile and new but real. "Okay," she said finally, her voice no longer wavering. A newfound strength resonated in her words. "I'm willing to try. I'm willing to learn, to grow, to become the person you see in me." Her heart thudded as she spoke the words, realizing that in saying them, she was accepting not just the opportunity, but also the possibility of so much more. Max's smile was radiant, his relief and joy evident. "That's all I ask? One step at a time, Amelia. We'll figure it out together." As they clinked glasses once more, Amelia felt a surge of excitement tempered with a flutter of terror. The safety and simplicity of her old life were slipping away, replaced by something unknown, something bigger and more daunting than she had ever faced. But standing beside Max, with his unwavering support and belief in her, she felt ready to embrace it. The path ahead wasn't clear, but for the first time she didn't feel alone in facing it. The city stretched out before them, vast and full of promise, a world of opportunity she had only ever dreamed of. A warm breeze ruffled her hair, and as she looked over the glittering skyline, Amelia allowed herself to dream of a future brighter than anything she had dared to imagine, a future where Max might not just be her mentor, but perhaps something more. The possibility of what that could mean made her pulse quicken, and for once, she didn't shy away from the thought. The following days passed in a blur, a whirlwind of meetings, presentations, and deep dives into corporate strategy. Amelia was thrust headfirst into a world that had once seemed unreachable, and to her surprise, she was thriving. Max had arranged for her to shadow department heads, learning from the best and gaining insights she had never expected to encounter. Mornings were spent with the marketing team, afternoons analyzing financial reports, and evenings were dedicated to dinners with Max and his executives, discussing product development, corporate vision, and future goals. One such evening, while dining at an exclusive restaurant that overlooked the Hudson River, Amelia found herself sitting across from Max and 3 other executives. The candlelight flickered between them, and though the setting was intimate, the weight of her new responsibilities hung heavily in the air. These were people who had built empires, and here she was, just beginning to understand her place in this world. "So, Amelia Catherine," the sharp-eyed CFO began with a curious smile, "Max mentioned that you've got some fresh ideas about our expansion into sustainable tech. Care to elaborate?" For a moment, Amelia felt panic rise in her chest. She wasn't an executive and wasn't used to speaking in these high-stakes situations. But then she saw Max, his gaze steady and full of encouragement. His faith in her was unwavering. She took a deep breath, feeling the strength return to her voice. "Well, I've been thinking," she began, her confidence growing with each word, "that there's an untapped market in rural communities. We've focused heavily on urban centers, but there's a growing demand for sustainable solutions in agricultural areas. If we could develop affordable, eco-friendly irrigation systems or solar-powered farm equipment, we could reach a whole new customer base and make a real difference in these communities." Silence fell over the table. Amelia's heart pounded as she waited for a response, her mind racing with doubt. Had she overstepped? Was her idea too ambitious? Then Catherine broke into a wide grin, her eyes sparkling with approval. "I like the way you think, Amelia. A fresh perspective, that's exactly what we need." Amelia felt a wave of relief wash over her, but it was more than that. It was the quiet realization that she belonged here, in this world of big ideas and bold moves. And as she glanced over at Max, his proud smile lighting up his face, she knew that this was only the beginning. As the conversation flowed effortlessly around the dinner table, Amelia felt a surge of pride wash over her. She had held her own in this world of power players and high-stakes decisions. Every time she glanced at Max, she saw that glimmer of approval in his eyes and something more, something warmer, something that made her pulse quicken. His gaze lingered just a little too long, his smile a touch softer, and it left her breathless, wondering if she was imagining the subtle shift between them. Later that night, as they walked through the bustling streets of Manhattan, the energy of the city buzzing around them, Max turned to her with that familiar smile that made her heart skip a beat. "You were brilliant tonight, Amelia," he said, his voice laced with genuine admiration. "You're adapting to this world faster than I could have ever imagined." Amelia blushed at the compliment, though it wasn't just his words but the closeness of their steps that sent warmth coursing through her. The crowded sidewalks forced them to walk closely, their hands brushing every so often, sparking little jolts of electricity each time they touched. She could feel the heat radiating from him, the awareness between them thick in the air. "It's all thanks to you, Max," she replied, her voice soft yet sincere. "You've given me an opportunity I never dreamed of." Max shook his head, a small, incredulous laugh escaping his lips. "I only opened the door, Amelia. You're the one who stepped through it and ran full speed ahead. I've just been watching in awe." They paused at a crosswalk, waiting for the light to change. Under the soft glow of the streetlights, Amelia could see the weight in his eyes, the exhaustion that his confident demeanor couldn't quite hide. The slight slump of his shoulders, the tension in his brow, it was subtle but undeniable. "Are you okay?" she asked gently, her voice filled with concern. "You seem tired." Max let out a deep sigh, running a hand through his copper hair, a gesture that made him seem more vulnerable than she had ever seen him. "It's been a long week," he admitted, his voice quieter now. "The deal with Holloway and Kensington is more complicated than I thought, and then there's the gala tomorrow night." His voice trailed off, the mention of the gala hanging heavily in the air. She knew it was a sore spot for him, his first time attending without his ex-wife. If you're still tuned into this video and find the story inspiring, drop a 3 in the comments to let me know you're still with me. Amelia's heart softened as she looked at him. "Is there anything I can do to help?" she offered, her tone gentle, wanting so badly to ease some of the burden he was carrying. Max's eyes met hers, and for a brief moment it felt as though the entire city had melted away, leaving only the two of them standing there in the quiet glow of the streetlights. His gaze was intense, filled with something deeper, something unspoken. "You already are," he whispered, his voice almost a caress, "more than you know." The world seemed to still be around them, the bustling crowd and honking cars fading into the background. Amelia felt a shiver run down her spine, not from the cool evening breeze, but from the warmth in his words and the way he was looking at her, like she was more than just an employee, more than just his assistant. The moment was broken by the flashing green light and the rush of pedestrians moving around them. As they crossed the street, Amelia felt Max's hand on the small of her back, guiding her gently through the crowd. The simple touch sent a cascade of tingles up her spine, and she swallowed hard, trying to steady her racing heart. When they arrived back at the hotel, they paused outside their adjoining rooms, the weight of the day settling over them. The city hummed quietly in the background, but all Amelia could hear was the rapid thudding of her heartbeat, amplified by the tension that hung thick in the air between them. It felt as though something was on the verge of being said, something unspoken yet undeniable. Amelia, Max began, his voice low, almost hesitant. He took a small step closer, his gaze locking with hers. "I just want you to know how much I appreciate everything you've done this week. You've not only exceeded my expectations, but you've completely redefined what I thought was possible." She looked up at him, her breath catching in her throat as she registered the closeness between them. She could feel the heat of his body, the quiet intensity in his eyes. "Thank you for believing in me," she whispered, her voice barely audible, but the vulnerability in her words clear. The air felt thick with possibility, her heart pounding in her chest, as if waiting for what might come next. For a moment, it seemed as though Max might say something more. His eyes searched hers, flickering with something deeper, something that made Amelia feel like she was standing on the edge of a precipice, ready to fall into whatever was waiting on the other side. But then, as if catching himself, he stepped back, the spell between them breaking. "Good night, Amelia," he said softly, his voice returning to the familiar warmth she knew. "Get some rest. Tomorrow's going to be a big day." Amelia nodded, feeling a mixture of relief and disappointment as she turned and entered her room. As the door clicked shut behind her, she leaned against it, her heart still racing, her thoughts swirling with the tension of what had just passed between them. What was happening? Was she imagining it, the lingering glances, the way their hands had brushed, the almost unspoken connection? She moved to the window, looking out over the glittering expanse of the city that had changed her life in a matter of days. Everything was different now. She wasn't just a housekeeper anymore. She was stepping into a new world, one where her ideas were valued, where she stood shoulder to shoulder with powerful people. But as exhilarating as this professional transformation was, it paled in comparison to the shifting dynamic between her and Max. It wasn't just her career that was evolving, something far more intimate was happening, something that made her both nervous and excited all at once. As she gazed out at the city, Amelia couldn't help but wonder what the next few days would bring. She felt like she was standing at the edge of something monumental, something that could change her life in ways she wasn't yet ready to fully understand. But whatever it was, she knew one thing for certain: she was ready to face it. The lines between employer and employee, mentor and protege, were blurring more with each passing day, and beneath it all, an undeniable current of attraction surged stronger every moment. Amelia could feel it in the lingering looks, in the warmth of his hand at the small of her back, and in the unspoken words that seemed to hang in the air between them. What was once a strictly professional relationship had evolved into something more complex, something that left her heart racing whenever Max was near. As she stood in front of the mirror, brushing her hair before bed, Amelia's thoughts drifted to the gala tomorrow night. It would be her first time attending such an exclusive, high-profile event, not as a part of the staff, quietly ensuring everything was in perfect order, but as a guest, as Max's guest. The thought sent a thrill through her, but with it came a wave of anxiety. Could she step into this new role with the same poise and confidence she had displayed so far? And more troubling, could she manage the growing tension between her and Max in such an intimate public setting? Amelia opened her closet, her hand grazing the sleek, emerald gown she had carefully selected for the event. It was more expensive than anything she had ever owned, a true statement piece. Max had insisted on it, saying it was part of her new role to look the part. But as her fingers lingered on the soft fabric, she couldn't help but wonder if it symbolized something deeper, the beginning of her transformation, not just in her career but in her relationship with him. As she climbed into bed, Amelia's mind whirled with questions. Was she truly ready for this new life? For the responsibilities Max was placing on her shoulders? Could she live up to the expectations not only of him but of the elite world she was now stepping into? And most pressingly, what would tomorrow night bring? The gala loomed in her mind, not just as a professional test but as a potential turning point. Her thoughts drifted to the look in Max's eyes earlier, the warmth, the unspoken connection. Something was building between them, something neither of them could ignore much longer. As she finally drifted off to sleep, her dreams were filled with swirling ballrooms, Max's intense gaze, and the dizzying possibility of a future she had never dared to imagine. Tomorrow night, she thought, might change everything. The grand ballroom of the plaza glittered with chandeliers and soft candlelight, the air filled with the sounds of refined laughter and clinking glasses. Amelia stood at the entrance, her heart pounding beneath the smooth fabric of her gown. The emerald dress fit her perfectly, accentuating her curves in a way that made her feel both exposed and empowered. She took a deep breath, trying to steady herself, but the nervous flutter in her stomach remained. Ready Max's voice came from beside her, steady and reassuring. She turned, and her breath caught in her throat. Max had always been handsome, but tonight, in his perfectly tailored tuxedo, he was breathtaking. The soft light seemed to catch the copper tones in his hair, and his eyes were filled with something more than just professional admiration. He paused for a moment, his gaze sweeping over her. "Amelia," he said softly, almost reverently, "you look stunning." A blush crept up her cheeks, and she found herself smiling despite the nerves. "Thank you. You clean up pretty well yourself," she teased lightly. Max grinned and offered his arm. "Shall we?" As they entered the ballroom together, Amelia was keenly aware of the eyes on them. She could hear the murmurs as they passed, whispers about Anderson's new protege and where did she come from. The weight of their curiosity pressed down on her. But Max leaned in close, his breath warm against her ear. "Ignore them," he said softly, his voice sending shivers down her spine. "You belong here, just as much as anyone else." His words were a balm to her nerves, and she straightened her shoulders, lifting her chin slightly. No longer was she the invisible housekeeper blending into the background. Tonight she was Max Anderson's right-hand woman, standing by his side as an equal, and she was determined to prove her worth. The evening passed in a whirlwind of introductions and conversations. Amelia found herself deep in discussions about market trends, sustainable technologies, and future innovations. She held her own, contributing ideas and perspectives that surprised even her. Each time she caught Max's eye across the room, there was pride in his gaze, a quiet admiration that filled her with a sense of accomplishment. As the orchestra struck up a waltz, Max turned to her, his hand extended in an invitation. "May I have this dance?" Amelia hesitated, a sudden wave of insecurity rising within her. "I'm not sure I remember the steps," she admitted, glancing around at the elegant couples already gliding across the dance floor. Max's smile was warm and reassuring. "Just follow my lead." He guided her gently onto the dance floor, one hand resting lightly on her waist, the other holding hers firmly. The moment they began to move, Amelia felt the tension melt away. Max's touch was steady, grounding her as they glided across the floor in perfect synchrony. She was acutely aware of their closeness, the way his hand rested possessively on her waist, the way his breath brushed against her cheek as they danced. "You're doing wonderfully," Max murmured, his voice soft but full of admiration. "Not just with the dancing, but with everything tonight. You've impressed a lot of people." Amelia looked up at him, her heart swelling with gratitude. "It's all because of you, Max. You gave me this chance." He shook his head slightly, his eyes never leaving hers. "No, Amelia. I may have opened the door, but you're the one who walked through it. You're extraordinary." The intensity of his gaze sent her heart racing, and for a moment, it felt as though the rest of the room had disappeared. It was just the two of them, moving together in perfect harmony, the connection between them growing stronger with each step. The air between them crackled with unspoken tension, and Amelia felt as though she were standing on the edge of something profound, something life-changing. At that moment, she realized that tonight wasn't just about the gala or proving herself in the corporate world. It was about the growing bond between her and Max, the slow-burning attraction that had been building for weeks, now on the verge of something more. As they danced, her heart pounding in rhythm with his, she knew one thing for certain: tomorrow would never be the same. As the music faded, Amelia and Max remained close, the world around them seemingly standing still. Neither wanted to break the moment, to let go of the connection that had been building between them. But the spell was abruptly shattered by a sharp, familiar voice cutting through the air. Well, Maxwell, aren't you full of surprises?" Both turned, and there she was, a striking woman in a crimson gown, her presence commanding the room. Amelia recognized her instantly. Vivian, Max's ex-wife. She had seen her in countless photos displayed in Max's study, forever tied to the glamorous life he had once shared with her. Max's posture shifted, tension creeping into his shoulders. "Vivian," he said coolly, "I didn't expect to see you here." Vivian's smile was all edge, her eyes glittering with something unkind. "Did you think I'd miss our annual gala?" Some habits die hard. Her gaze slid to Amelia, eyes narrowing in silent judgment. "And who might this be?" "This is Amelia Carter," Max responded, his voice a little too tight. "My new VP of Strategy." Vivian raised an eyebrow, her amusement thinly veiled. "VP of Strategy?" "My Maxwell, you have been busy." Her voice dripped with condescension as she turned to Amelia. "Tell me, Amelia, how does one go from folding sheets to corporate strategy?" A rush of anger surged through Amelia at the insult. She could feel the heat rising in her chest, but before she could react, Max was already stepping forward, his tone firm. "Amelia has demonstrated exceptional talent and insight. Her perspective is unique, and it's already making an impact on the company." Vivian's laugh was sharp, cutting. "Oh, always the knight in shining armor, aren't you, Maxwell? Defending the damsel. I just hope you know what you're doing professionally and personally." Her eyes lingered on Max before she turned on her heel, sauntering away with the confidence of someone who knew she had left a mark. An uncomfortable silence settled in her wake. Max turned to Amelia, an apology written all over his face. "I'm so sorry about that. Vivian can be." Amelia shook her head, trying to push away the sting of the interaction. "It's okay, Max. You don't have to explain." They moved to a quieter corner of the ballroom, where the glittering lights seemed distant and the noise of the gala faded. Max ran a hand through his hair, a gesture that Amelia had come to recognize as a sign of his stress. "I should have warned you she might be here," he said, his voice full of regret. "Things between us, well, they didn't end on the best terms." Amelia placed her hand gently on his arm, offering comfort. "Max, it's all right, really. I can handle it." He looked at her then, his eyes softening, gratitude mixing with something deeper. "You're remarkable, Amelia." Most people would have folded under Vivian's scrutiny. She gave him a small smile, trying to lighten the mood. "I've dealt with worse. Besides, I know who I am, and I know what I'm capable of. Your faith in me, it means everything." The intensity in Max's gaze deepened, and for a moment his emotions seemed to hang in the air between them, palpable and raw. "Amelia," he began, but before he could finish, Vincent Holloway approached, eager to discuss business. The interruption left the moment unresolved, but Amelia couldn't shake the weight of what Max had almost said. The night continued, but her mind kept returning to that dance, to the way Max had looked at her, as though she were more than just a protégé, more than just someone learning the ropes of corporate strategy. When they finally returned to the hotel, the weight of the evening settled over them. They stood outside their rooms, the dim hallway casting soft shadows on their faces. Both seemed reluctant to part, as though the night still held things unsaid, emotions unspoken. "Thank you for tonight," Amelia said quietly. "For everything." Max stepped closer, his eyes searching hers, his expression open and raw, in a way that made Amelia's heart race. "Amelia," he began, his voice low, "there's something I need you to know. What I see in you, it's not just about business." He trailed off, his words hanging in the air between them, heavy with meaning. For a breathless moment, Amelia thought he might kiss her. The space between them seemed to shrink, and she could see the conflict in his eyes, the push and pull of his emotions. But then, as if making a decision, he stepped back, the wall of professionalism slipping back into place. "You're going to change the world someday, Amelia Carter," he said, his voice steady but with an undercurrent of something deeper. "I'm just glad I get to be part of your journey." Amelia felt her heart pound as she nodded, barely able to find the words. "Good night, Max." As she entered her room and closed the door behind her, she leaned against it, her heart racing from the whirlwind of the evening. Triumph, insecurity, and something undeniably electric between her and Max swirled in her chest, leaving her breathless. She moved to the window, looking out at the city that had become the backdrop to her transformation. In just a week, her entire world had shifted on its axis. She was no longer invisible, no longer just a housekeeper fading into the background. She was someone who was seen, valued, and respected, and Max saw her in a way that no one else ever had. As she prepared for bed, Amelia's thoughts danced between the tension with Vivian, Max's unspoken words, and the possibilities of the future. The path ahead was unclear, but one thing was certain: this was just the beginning of something far greater than she had ever imagined. The final day of their New York trip dawned bright and clear, yet Amelia woke with a mix of emotions swirling inside her. The memory of the gala still clung to her, the dance, Max's lingering gaze, and the sharp encounter with Vivian. Everything seemed heightened, as though she stood on the brink of a significant shift in her life. As she sipped her morning coffee, the skyline stretched before her like a canvas of endless possibilities. And yet, beneath the excitement, a faint sense of unease gnawed at her, as though everything she had built over the past week could unravel in an instant. A soft knock on the connecting door jolted her from her thoughts. "Amelia, are you awake?" Max's voice came through, quieter, more hesitant than usual. She glanced down at her robe, quickly smoothing it before calling, "Come in." Max entered, looking as polished as ever in a perfectly tailored suit, but there was something different about him. The tension in his shoulders, the way his eyes flickered over her before he quickly looked away, it all signaled that this morning wasn't just about business. "I hope I'm not disturbing you," he began, his voice more formal than usual. "I thought we could go over the agenda for today before our final meetings." Amelia nodded, reaching for her tablet, but the weight of Max's gaze was unmistakable. She could feel the air thick with unspoken words, the pressure of something unresolved between them. If you're still tuned into this video and find the story inspiring, drop a 4 in the comments to let me know you're still with me. "Max," she said softly, setting the tablet aside, sensing that their conversation was headed somewhere deeper. "Is everything all right?" Max sighed heavily, his usual composure faltering as he ran a hand through his hair. "Amelia, I need to talk to you about something important." He paced the room for a moment, the nervous energy radiating from him in waves, before stopping in front of her. "I received a call this morning from the board. They're concerned about the nature of our relationship." The words hit her like a punch to the gut, her cheeks flushing with a mix of shock and embarrassment. "Our relationship," she echoed, her voice barely steady. Max nodded grimly, the tension between them thickening. "Vivian's been talking, making insinuations, spreading rumors. They're questioning why you've risen so quickly, implying that my decision to mentor you is based on something personal rather than professional." Amelia felt her stomach drop. The insinuation behind his words was clear, and it stung. "They think I'm that," where her voice trailed off, the unspoken accusation hanging between them. Max's jaw tightened as he nodded. "I've assured them that everything between us is strictly professional, that your promotion and rapid advancement are based solely on your talents and abilities." A mix of emotions churned within her: anger at the baseless rumors, frustration that her hard-earned success was being questioned, and a sharp, unspoken disappointment that this moment was forcing them to confront the very thing they had been dancing around. "Strictly professional, of course," she repeated, her voice tight. "What does this mean for my role at the company?" Max's expression softened his concern for her. "Your position is secure, Amelia. I won't let anyone undermine what you've accomplished." He paused, a shadow of regret crossing his face. "But we may need to be more cautious. The board's watching closely, and until this settles down, we need to keep things at arm's length." Amelia nodded, even as the ache in her chest deepened. "I understand. We can't let anything compromise the company or your reputation." The words felt heavy, like they were closing the door on something neither of them had been ready to fully acknowledge. For a moment, silence stretched between them, thick with unsaid things. Max looked at her, his eyes full of something raw, something he had been holding back for too long. "Amelia," he began, his voice low and intense, as though he were on the edge of saying something that could change everything. "I want you to know that I—" But the shrill ring of his phone cut through the tension, jarring them both back to reality. Max glanced at the screen, his expression hardening. "It's the board," he muttered, clearly torn between the conversation they were having and the one he had to take. "I'm sorry, I have to handle this." Amelia nodded numbly, watching as he stepped out of the room to take the call. The silence that followed was deafening. She sank onto the edge of the bed, her mind reeling from the whirlwind of emotions. Just when she had begun to find her footing, everything, her career, her budding connection with Max, felt as though it was slipping through her fingers. She stared down at her hands, trying to steady herself, but all she could think about were Max's unfinished words, the look in his eyes that had said so much more than he'd been able to voice. "I want you to know that I—" What had he been about to say? Would he have told her how he truly felt? Or would he have continued to hold back, putting the company and his professional obligations first? Her mind whirled, racing with possibilities. The future had felt so certain just days ago, but now everything was uncertain again. She had come so far, broken through so many barriers, but the challenges she faced now were more personal than ever. As Max's voice drifted faintly through the door, Amelia knew one thing for sure: this wasn't just about business anymore. Something far deeper was at play, something neither she nor Max could ignore much longer. The day ahead loomed large, filled with meetings and final decisions, but it wasn't the corporate agenda that weighed on her heart. It was the unresolved tension between her and Max, and the nagging feeling that they were standing on the precipice of something life-changing. The path ahead was uncertain, but for the first time, Amelia felt a sense of clarity. She wasn't going to let fear or rumors define her future. Whatever lay ahead, whether professional triumphs or the possibility of something more with Max, she was ready to face it head-on. With that thought, she stood, straightened her shoulders, and prepared herself for whatever the day and the future would bring. The rest of the day blurred together in a haze of meetings, phone calls, and negotiations. Amelia worked tirelessly, throwing herself into every task with a focus that bordered on obsession. She was determined to prove herself, to show the world, and perhaps more importantly, herself, that her success wasn't tied to anyone else's influence, least of all Max's. But no matter how hard she tried to drown herself in work, she couldn't shake the growing sense of distance between them. Every time she glanced in his direction, he seemed just out of reach, physically present, but emotionally withdrawn. There were no more warm smiles exchanged in passing, no more of the casual touches that used to flow so naturally between them. He avoided being alone with her, and when their paths crossed, the once easy, playful banter had been replaced by something stilted, something heavy. As the day drew to a close, and they prepared to board the private jet back to Seattle, Amelia felt a deep ache settle in her chest, an emptiness that wasn't just about work or stress. It was the realization that this magical week in New York, which had once seemed so full of potential, was ending in uncertainty and a suffocating sense of restraint. She wanted to say something, to break through the wall that had slowly, silently built itself between them, but she didn't know where to start. Settling into her seat on the plane, Amelia gazed out the window as the sparkling lights of the city twinkled below. New York, with all its promise, was slipping away beneath the clouds, and she felt as if something precious was slipping away with it. Across from her, Max sat engrossed in his laptop, the glow of the screen casting sharp shadows across his face. The distance between them felt like miles, even though he was just a few feet away. It wasn't just physical distance, it was an emotional gulf, one that had slowly, agonizingly opened over the past few days. Amelia swallowed the lump forming in her throat and tried to focus on the view outside, but her thoughts kept returning to Max, the man who had brought her into this world of high stakes and big dreams. The man who had believed in her from the start. The man she was beginning to realize meant far more to her than just a mentor or a boss. And yet, here they were, with a chasm between them that neither seemed willing or able to cross. Halfway through the flight, the silence between them became unbearable. The hum of the plane's engine seemed to amplify the tension in the cabin. Finally, Max broke the quiet, his voice low and thick with regret. "Amelia, I'm sorry." About everything, he sighed, running a hand through his hair in frustration. "It's not fair to you." "Oh." Amelia turned to look at him, her heart constricting at the vulnerability in his eyes. For all his power and confidence, at this moment, Max looked almost lost. "It's not your fault, Max," she replied softly, trying to offer him some comfort, even as her own emotions twisted inside her. "We both know there's nothing inappropriate between us." But as the words left her mouth, Amelia knew they weren't entirely true. There may have been no physical line crossed, but the emotions swirling between them, unspoken yet undeniable, had crossed a threshold long ago. There was something between them, something that neither of them had fully acknowledged, but that had been growing steadily, quietly beneath the surface. Max leaned forward, his voice barely above a whisper, but filled with intensity. "Amelia, you have to know, regardless of what anyone says, I believe in you. Your talent, your potential, it's all real. I don't regret bringing you into this for a second." His words warmed her, wrapping around her heart. But they also served as a stark reminder of the impossible situation they were in. As long as she remained his employee, as long as her rise in the company could be attributed to his influence, any feelings between them, no matter how real, no matter how deep, would be seen as tainted. Amelia's chest tightened with a mix of emotions: gratitude for his belief in her, guilt for the unspoken attraction between them, and a sharp, painful awareness of the line they could never cross. She wanted to believe that his faith in her was enough, that it could sustain them both, but deep down she knew that staying in this limbo wasn't fair to either of them. As the plane began its descent into Seattle, Amelia made a decision. It was a decision that had been forming in the back of her mind for days, maybe even weeks, but she hadn't wanted to confront it until now. It wasn't easy, but it was the only way forward, the only way she could reclaim her sense of self-worth, her independence, and her integrity. "Max," she said quietly, her voice steady despite the storm of emotions raging inside her. "I've been thinking. I need to step down from my position at the company." His head snapped up, surprise and disbelief flashing across his face. What his voice was laced with shock. "Amelia, no, you can't let these rumors this." She held up a hand to stop him, her eyes locking with his. "It's not just about the rumors, Max. It's about me. About proving to myself that I can do this on my own. I need to know that my success isn't tied to you, that I can stand on my own 2 feet without anyone questioning whether I deserve to be there. I'm grateful for everything you've done for me, more than I can say, but I need to forge my path now." Max was silent for a long moment, his eyes searching hers, a myriad of emotions flickering across his face: hurt, confusion, and a deep, unspoken sadness. "I understand," he said finally, his voice heavy. "I don't like it, but I understand." The words hung between them, thick with meaning. It was the first time they had openly acknowledged the impossibility of their situation, the first time they had spoken the truth that had been lingering just beneath the surface for so long. As the plane touched down, Amelia felt a strange mix of emotions: a profound sadness for what she was leaving behind, but also a fierce determination to step into a future she could truly call her own. She was walking away from something, yes, but she was also walking towards something: her independence, her sense of self. "This isn't goodbye," she said softly as they prepared to disembark. "It's just, see you later." Max's hand found hers, his grip firm but gentle, a silent promise. "I'll be here, Amelia," he whispered, his voice filled with emotion. "Whatever you need, whenever you're ready." They parted ways at the airport, the unspoken words still hanging in the air between them. Amelia felt both a profound sense of loss and an unexpected sense of liberation. The week in New York had changed her in ways she hadn't expected. It had shown her what she was capable of, giving her a glimpse of a life she had only dreamed of. But more than that, it had awakened feelings in her heart, feelings she could no longer ignore, feelings for a man who had believed in her when she hadn't even believed in herself. As she hailed a taxi, she glanced back one last time. Max stood by his car, watching her go, his expression unreadable. The distance between them felt vast, an ocean of emotions and missed chances. But Amelia knew that this distance, as painful as it was necessary for now, because someday she promised herself she would return, not as Max's protege or employee, but as his equal. And then maybe, just maybe, they could finally explore the connection that had always been there, waiting patiently beneath the surface without fear, without hesitation, and without the weight of the past holding them back. With that thought giving her strength, Amelia turned away and stepped into her new future, uncertain, challenging, but full of promise. 2 years had passed since that pivotal week in New York, 2 years marked by intense hard work, unwavering determination, and profound self-discovery. Amelia stood in front of the mirror, adjusting the sharp lines of her sleek black blazer. The woman who gazed back at her was nothing like the hesitant, unsure person she had once been. Her eyes gleamed with confidence and purpose. After leaving Max's company, she threw herself into rebuilding her life from the ground up. She had invested her savings into business courses, juggling part-time jobs just to make ends meet. Her natural talent, coupled with the lessons she'd absorbed during her brief but invaluable corporate experience, quickly distinguished her from her peers. And now, at 30, Amelia had risen to heights she once barely dared to dream of. She was the founder and CEO of her startup, a company focused on creating sustainable technology solutions for underserved rural communities. The very idea she'd nervously pitched during that unforgettable dinner in New York had become her life's mission. It was no longer just a concept. It was a thriving enterprise making real-world impacts. She gathered her presentation materials, feeling a familiar rush of excitement and nerves. Her phone buzzed, and a text from her assistant flashed across the screen. "Mr. Anderson has arrived for the meeting." Her heart faltered for a brief moment. Max. She hadn't seen him in person since the day they'd parted ways at the airport. They'd kept in touch, occasionally brief emails, the odd phone call just enough to maintain a professional distance, but always with the weight of unresolved emotions between them. He cheered her on from afar, his words of encouragement and advice always appearing at just the right moments. Yet they both knew that their connection had never truly been about business. Taking a deep breath to steady herself, Amelia straightened her shoulders and stepped out of her office, her heels clicking on the polished floor as she made her way to the conference room. And there he was, Maxwell Anderson, just as striking and commanding as she remembered. Time had done little to diminish his presence. If anything, there was a new softness in his features, a warmth in his eyes when they met hers that made her heart skip a beat. Amelia. Max greeted her, his voice carrying an undercurrent of emotion that caught her off guard. "It's wonderful to see you, Max," she responded, surprised by the steadiness in her voice. "Thank you for coming. It means a lot to have you here for this." The room was full. Amelia's dedicated team stood beside several investors, all here to witness a momentous presentation. But in that fleeting exchange, it felt as though the room had faded away, and for just a moment, it was only the two of them. As the meeting began, she took a deep breath and launched into her pitch, her voice strong and sure. She outlined her company's mission with conviction, detailing their successes and the bold steps they planned to take for future growth. Through it all, she felt Max's gaze on her, steady, unwavering, and filled with pride that reached across the room and wrapped around her like a blanket. It steadied her even as emotions churned beneath her composed surface. She could feel the investors responding to her passion, their expressions shifting from curiosity to admiration as she spoke with authority, revealing carefully crafted strategies and compelling numbers. When she concluded, the room erupted into applause. Investors rushed to her, eager to speak, to sign on, to be part of her vision. She shook hands and exchanged excited smiles, her heart racing from the success. But as the buzz of conversation swirled around her, her eyes sought out Max's across the room. He stood at a distance, watching her with a look of quiet pride, a small nod of approval, and something deeper in his eyes, a depth of emotion she wasn't ready to name. Hours later, when the contracts had been signed and champagne had been poured, Amelia found herself alone with Max on the balcony of her office, the cool night air brushing against her skin as the lights of the Seattle skyline glittered below them. "You were incredible in there," Max said softly, his voice carrying the same quiet intensity that had always drawn her in. "I always knew you had it in you, but seeing you like this, you've exceeded even my highest expectations, Amelia." She turned to face him, her lips curving into a small, knowing smile. "I had a good teacher," she said, a hint of playfulness in her tone. Max shook his head, his expression earnest. "No, Amelia. This was all you, your vision, your drive. I might have opened a door, but you kicked it wide open. I'm honored to have played even the smallest part in your journey." The silence that followed was thick with unspoken words, the weight of 2 years pressing down on them both. It was a silence that begged to be filled, but neither knew quite how to break. Finally, Amelia took a deep breath, her heart pounding as she spoke the words she had long held inside. "Max, I need to thank you. Not just for believing in me back then, but for letting me go, for giving me the space to become who I needed to be." Max took a step closer, his eyes never leaving hers. His voice when he spoke was rough with emotion. "Letting you go was one of the hardest things I've ever done. But seeing you now, seeing what you've built, what you've become, I know it was the right thing. It was always the right thing." She searched his face, her breath catching in her throat, as she saw the raw honesty in his eyes. The years had changed them both, but the connection between them was still there, simmering beneath the surface, waiting for the right moment to be fully acknowledged. Max reached for her hand, the touch gentle yet charged with meaning. "Amelia, I've missed you," he admitted quietly, his voice barely more than a whisper, but the words landed between them like a thunderclap. She swallowed hard, her own emotions swirling to the surface. "I've missed you too, Max." For a long moment they stood there in the stillness, their hands intertwined as the city stretched out beneath them. Amelia felt a sense of closure, but also of something new beginning, something that had been waiting patiently for the right time. And now finally that time seemed to be within reach. The distance that had once separated them, the emotional walls, the unspoken boundaries had faded away, leaving behind only the truth of their connection, strong and undeniable. Amelia knew they had both grown, had both found their paths. But now, standing here with Max, she realized that perhaps their paths were no longer meant to be separate. With a soft smile, she looked into his eyes, seeing not just the man who had been her mentor, but the man who had always believed in her, even when she doubted herself. "This is just the beginning, Max," she said, her voice filled with quiet certainty. Max's eyes gleamed with the same conviction, his hand tightening around hers. "I know," he replied, his smile mirroring hers, "and I'm ready for whatever comes next." Together they stood on the edge of something new, uncertain and challenging, but full of promise. And this time they would face it as equals, side by side, ready to explore the possibilities that lay ahead without fear, without hesitation, and without anything standing in their way. If you're still tuned into this video and find the story inspiring, drop a 5 in the comments to let me know you're still with me. And now Amelia asked, her heart racing with both anticipation and vulnerability, "Where do we go from here?" Max stepped closer, his hand finding hers, warm and reassuring. He looked into her eyes, his voice low and tender. "That depends on you, Amelia. I'm not your mentor anymore. I'm not your boss. We're equals now, in every way." The air between them crackled with unspoken possibility, the weight of everything they'd shared and everything they'd withheld hanging between them. Amelia's mind drifted back to that night in New York, to all the almost moments, the stolen glances, and the quiet yearning that had filled the space between them. But now, standing here with nothing left unsaid, there were no more barriers, no more reasons to hold back. "I've missed you," she whispered, stepping closer, her voice soft but charged with emotion. The words felt both freeing and terrifying, as though admitting them finally released the hold the past had on her. Max's gaze never wavered as he replied, his voice husky with feeling. "I've missed you too, more than you know." In that instant, the 2 years of longing, of separation, of unspoken desire seemed to evaporate. When their lips finally met, it was as if time itself had held its breath, waiting for this moment. The kiss was gentle at first, hesitant as if they were rediscovering something fragile and precious. But the softness quickly gave way to something deeper, more urgent, as their emotions surged to the surface, passion and longing that had been held back for far too long. When they finally broke apart, both breathless and a little dazed, Amelia couldn't help but laugh, a sound full of relief and joy. "You know," she said teasingly, "this isn't exactly how I imagined my big investor meeting ending." Max chuckled, his arms still wrapped around her, his smile bright with happiness. "I'd say it's a pretty good outcome for both our companies and for us." As they stood there, locked in each other's embrace, the cool night air carrying the faint sounds of the city below, Amelia felt a profound sense of gratitude for the journey that had brought her to this moment. From the woman who once silently admired Max from a distance to the strong, successful entrepreneur standing as his equal, she marveled at the twists and turns of her path. And now, here they were together, unburdened by the past, standing on the edge of something new. So Max said, a playful glint in his eye, his voice lighter now, "What's next for the brilliant Amelia Carter?" Amelia looked up at him, her heart full of love, her mind buzzing with the endless possibilities of their shared future. "I'm not sure," she replied, her smile wide and bright, "but I do know one thing, whatever comes next, I want you by my side." Max's expression softened, his eyes brimming with warmth and love, as he leaned in, sealing his promise with another kiss. "Always," he whispered against her lips, the word as much a vow as it was a declaration. As the night deepened around them, the lights of Seattle twinkling like a sea of stars beneath their feet, Amelia knew that this was just the beginning of a new chapter in her life. There would be challenges ahead, of course, merging their personal and professional lives, navigating the complexities of the business world as a couple, and continuing to prove her worth outside of Max's influence, but she was ready for it all. She felt stronger and more certain of herself and her future than ever before. Because now, for the first time, she and Max were truly partners, business partners in life and love. Their story, unconventional as it was, had come full circle, and yet she knew in her heart that the best was still to come. Together they would face whatever the future held, no longer as mentor and protege, nor as boss and employee, but as equals standing side by side, ready to embrace whatever came next. As they stood there, the warmth of their love wrapping around them like a protective shield, Amelia smiled to herself. Life had a funny way of taking unexpected turns, of leading her down paths she never could have anticipated. But this path, this journey, felt like the one she was always meant to walk. And now, with Max by her side, she was ready to step into whatever awaited them, confident that together they could take on the world. As we close this chapter of Amelia and Max's journey, it's time to reflect on the powerful themes we've just witnessed: self-discovery, perseverance, love, and the importance of equality in relationships. Now we turn the question to you: what have you learned from their story? Is there a lesson about personal growth or the courage to embrace the path that resonated with you? Perhaps it's the reminder that love, when built on respect and equality, can overcome any obstacle. We'd love to hear your thoughts. Comment below with one thing you've learned from this story and how you'll bring it into practice in your own life. If you liked this video, please leave your comment below, and don't forget to like, share, and subscribe to our YouTube channel to stay connected with more inspiring stories just like this one.